I was 59 when I first admitted something I had been hiding for years. I was lonely. Not the kind of lonely people talk about when the house is empty. No, I was lonely sitting right beside my husband at the dinner table. My name is Margaret Ellis. Most people called me Maggie. I was 59 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. I had worked for almost 30 years as a school secretary. I knew every child's lunch schedule, every teacher's birthday, and every worried parent's voice on the phone. At work, I was needed. At home, I felt invisible. My husband's name was Robert. He was 63 then, a retired railroad mechanic. Strong hands, quiet eyes, the kind of man who could fix a broken furnace in the middle of January, but could not say what was sitting heavy inside his own chest. We had been married for 36 years. 36 years sounds like a victory when you say it out loud. But sometimes, a long marriage can become a hallway where two people keep passing each other without stopping. We had 2 children. Our daughter Emily lived in North Carolina with her husband and 2 little boys. Our son Jason worked in Denver and called when he could. They were good kids, but they had their own lives, and that is how it should be. Still, after they left, the house changed. The silence got bigger. The rooms felt wider. Even the old family photos on the wall started to feel like memories from someone else's life. Every morning, Robert sat at the kitchen table with his black coffee and the newspaper. I would make toast. He would turn the page. I would say, "Looks like rain today." He would answer, "Mm-hmm." That was most of our conversation. Not angry, not cruel, just empty. And somehow, that hurt more. Because when someone shouts at you, at least they are still reaching for you. But silence can make you feel like you disappeared slowly and nobody noticed. Maybe you have felt this too. Maybe you have sat across from someone you loved and wondered when their face became harder to read. I used to watch Robert in the evenings. He would sit in his brown recliner, remote in hand, watching old westerns. The blue light from the television would flicker across his face. I would sit on the sofa with my knitting basket beside me, pretending to count stitches. But really, I was waiting for him to ask about my day, waiting for him to look over and smile, waiting for anything that felt like us. But most nights, he fell asleep before the second show ended, and I would turn down the volume, fold the blanket over his lap, and go upstairs alone. That was the strange part. I still cared for him. I still made sure his prescriptions were refilled. I still bought the kind of cereal he liked. I still warmed his towel in the dryer on cold mornings because his joints hurt. But somewhere along the way, caring had replaced closeness. I did not know how to explain that. One Thursday in October, everything felt heavier than usual. The leaves were turning orange outside the kitchen window. The house smelled like vegetable soup. I had made Robert's favorite: beef, potatoes, carrots, celery, the kind of soup that used to bring him into the kitchen before it was ready. Years ago, he would lift the lid, breathe in, and say, "Maggie, if this tastes as good as it smells, I may marry you again." That Thursday, he did not notice. He came in from the garage, washed his hands, sat down, and ate quietly. I watched him take one spoonful after another. Finally, I said, "Do you like it?" He looked up like I had interrupted a thought. "It's fine," he said. "Fine." That little word landed hard. I do not know why that was the moment. After years of silence, one small word broke something open inside me. I put my spoon down. My hands were trembling. Robert noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked. And for a second, I almost said, "Nothing." That was my habit. Nothing. I had said it for years. When I cried in the laundry room. When I sat in the car outside the grocery store because I did not want to go back home yet. When our anniversary passed with only a store-bought card and no eye contact. Nothing. But that night, I could not say it anymore. So I looked at my husband of 36 years and whispered, "I am lonely, Robert." He froze. The spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes lifted slowly. I expected him to be confused, maybe even annoyed, but he looked scared, like I had opened a door he had been holding shut. He set the spoon down carefully. Then he said something I never expected. "So am I." For a moment, the whole kitchen went still. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. I stared at him. "What?" He rubbed his forehead with both hands. I said, "So am I." I felt anger rise first, not sadness, anger. Because how dare he? How could he be lonely when I was right there? How could he sit beside me every day, barely speak to me, and then say he was lonely too? I wanted to shout. I wanted to say, "Then why did you leave me alone inside this marriage?" But his face stopped me. Robert looked older than I had noticed, not just tired, worn down. His shoulders were bent forward. His eyes were wet. though he was trying hard to hide it. And suddenly, I realized something that frightened me. Maybe I had not been the only invisible person in that house. Robert leaned back in his chair, as if the words had taken something out of him. "I didn't know how to say it," he murmured. I sat there, staring at the man I had shared a bed with for decades, and yet, in that moment, he felt like someone I had never truly met. "How long?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the kitchen, at the same cabinets we had painted together years ago, at the same table where our children used to do homework, where birthdays had been celebrated, where laughter once came easily. "A long time," he finally said. That answer hurt more than I expected, because it meant all those silent dinners, all those quiet nights, they weren't just mine, they were his too. But neither of us reached out. Maybe you understand this. Sometimes in long marriages, people don't drift apart in one big moment. They drift, inch by inch, word by word, silence by silence, until one day you wake up and realize you're living beside a stranger you still love. I folded my hands in my lap. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Robert gave a small, tired smile. "You think I didn't try?" That caught me off guard. "I would come home, and you looked busy," he said. "Always doing something. Cooking, cleaning, knitting, calling the kids." I frowned slightly. "I was taking care of the house." "I know," he said softly. "And I appreciated that. I just didn't know where I fit anymore." That sentence sat between us like something fragile. "I thought you didn't want to talk," I said. "I thought you didn't want to listen," he replied. And there it was. Not anger, not betrayal, just two people, both waiting, both assuming, both slowly building walls out of silence. I felt something shift inside me. Not a big dramatic change, just a small crack in something that had been closed for years. We sat there for a while without speaking, but this silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was full of things we had never said. That night, we didn't go to our usual places. Robert didn't go to his recliner. I didn't pick up my knitting. We stayed at the table. It felt strange at first, like sitting across from someone new. "What do you do out there in the garage so much?" I asked. He let out a soft breath. "I fix things that don't talk back," he said. That made me pause. He looked down at his hands. "They're easier," he added quietly. I nodded. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. "I go to the laundry room sometimes," I said. He looked up, confused. "For what?" "To cry," I answered simply. His face changed instantly. Pain. Real pain. "You never told me that," he whispered. "You never asked," I said. We both sat with that truth. No blame, just reality. Later that evening, we moved to the living room together, not out of habit, out of choice. Robert sat on the recliner, but this time, he didn't turn the TV on. I sat on the sofa. We faced each other in a quiet room that suddenly felt unfamiliar, like it was waiting to see what we would do next. "Do you remember the lake?" he asked after a while. I blinked. "The one we used to go to before the kids were born?" He nodded. I smiled faintly. "You used to bring that old fishing rod," I said. "And you used to complain about the bugs," he replied. I let out a small laugh, a real one, not polite, not forced. It had been a long time since I heard that sound come from myself. "I didn't like the bugs," I said. "You stayed anyway," he replied. "Because you asked me to." He looked at me carefully. "And you came." There was something in the way he said that, something soft, something almost forgotten. And in that moment, I saw it. Not the man who sat quietly at dinner, not the man who answered fine, but the man who used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. And I wondered, when did we stop choosing each other? Because that's what it felt like now. Not that love had disappeared, but that we had stopped choosing it every day. The next morning felt different, subtle, but different. Robert was already at the table when I came into the kitchen. coffee in his hand, newspaper folded beside him. But instead of reading, he was just sitting there, waiting. "For you," he said. Those 2 words did something to me. I don't know why. Maybe because I hadn't heard them in years. I made breakfast, eggs and toast. Nothing special, but when I placed the plate in front of him, he looked at it, then at me. "Thank you," he said. And this time, it didn't feel like a routine word. It felt intentional. We ate slowly, we talked a little. Not deep things, not yet, but more than and somehow, that was enough for that moment. But change is not magic. It doesn't fix everything overnight. That afternoon, Robert went back to the garage, and I felt that old familiar ache again. The quiet, the distance, the doubt. Was last night just a moment, or was it something real? I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the back door. Then, for the first time in years, I walked outside and opened it. He was at his workbench, focused on something small in his hands. He looked up, surprised. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded. Then I stepped inside the garage. "I just didn't want to sit alone," I said. He stared at me for a second. Then he moved a box off a nearby chair. "Sit," he said. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't dramatic, but it was an invitation. And maybe that's where something new began. I sat down on that old wooden chair in the garage, unsure of what to do with my hands. The space smelled like oil and dust, and something oddly familiar. For years, this had been Robert's world, a place I never really entered. Not because I wasn't allowed, but because somewhere along the way, I stopped trying. He went back to what he was fixing, a small metal part, maybe from an old engine. I didn't ask, at least not right away. We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was shared. After a few minutes, I finally said, "What is that thing?" He smiled faintly. "Fuel pump from a '72 Chevy," he said. "Belongs to my friend Carl." I nodded like I understood. Truth is, I didn't. But I stayed, and that mattered more. "You still enjoy this?" I asked. He paused, then shrugged. "It gives me something to focus on," he said. I watched his hands, steady, careful. "These hands built a lot," I said softly. He looked at me, surprised. "I guess they did," he replied. I hesitated, then added, "They built a life, too." He didn't answer, but his eyes changed. "You know, sometimes appreciation comes too late. Not because we didn't feel it, but because we didn't say it." I stayed there for almost an hour. We didn't talk much, but when I got up to leave, something felt lighter, like a small door had opened. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat beside him, in his recliner room. Not across the room, not waiting, beside him. The TV was on, some old Western again, but I wasn't watching the screen. I was watching him. After a few minutes, he noticed. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, but then I added, "I just missed sitting like this." He didn't respond with words. Instead, he moved his hand, just slightly, until it touched mine. It wasn't a grand gesture, no music, no dramatic moment, just fingers brushing. But after years of distance, that small touch felt louder than anything. Maybe you understand this. At this stage in life, love doesn't return with fireworks. It returns quietly, in small choices, in simple moments. The next few days weren't perfect. We still had pauses, still had moments where old habits tried to come back. He would go quiet, I would hesitate. But something had changed. We noticed it now. That made all the difference. One afternoon, I found an old photo album in the hallway closet. Dust had settled on it, like it had been waiting for someone to remember. I brought it to the living room. "Look what I found," I said. Robert adjusted his glasses. When he saw the cover, his expression softened. We sat together, turning pages slowly. There we were, younger, laughing, standing by that lake, holding hands without thinking. This was before everything got busy, I said. He nodded. We didn't have much back then, he said. But we had time, I replied. He looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't look away. I think we lost that, he said. I swallowed. No, I said quietly. We stopped protecting it. That truth stayed with us, because love doesn't disappear on its own. It fades when we stop feeding it. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. Robert stood up from his chair. Get your coat, he said. I blinked. Why? We're going out, he replied. I almost laughed. Out where? You'll see. I hadn't heard that tone in years. Not a question, not routine, a decision. We drove for about 20 minutes, mostly quiet, but not uncomfortable. When he stopped the car, I recognized the place instantly. The lake, the same one from years ago. I felt something tighten in my chest. It's smaller than I remember, I said as we stepped out. He smiled. Or maybe we just got bigger, he replied. We walked slowly to the edge. The water was calm, the air cool. The kind of quiet that feels peaceful, not empty. We stood there, side by side, not speaking, just being. After a while, Robert said something that stayed with me. I thought loneliness was just part of getting older. I looked at him. So did I said. He shook his head slightly. But I think it's what happens when we stop showing up for each other. That hit deep because it was true. Loneliness didn't come from being alone. It came from being unseen, unheard, unfelt, and we had both done that to each other without realizing it. He reached for my hand, this time fully, holding it, not by accident, not by habit, by choice. And in that quiet moment by the water, I realized something I hadn't understood at 59. Loneliness wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing we had the power to change it all along. We stood there for a long time. The water moved slowly, just small ripples, nothing dramatic, but something inside me felt different, calmer, not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because for the first time in years, we were both present, fully, not thinking about what we didn't say yesterday, not worrying about tomorrow, just here, together. On the drive back home, Robert didn't turn on the radio. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently over mine. That simple gesture stayed there the entire ride. No words, but no distance either. That night, something small but important happened. We went to bed at the same time. That may sound normal to some people, but in our house, it had become rare. For years, one of us would stay up, avoiding the quiet of that shared space, avoiding what we didn't know how to fix. But that night, we didn't avoid it. We faced it. We lay there in the dark, side by side, and after a few minutes, Robert spoke. I thought you didn't need me anymore, he said quietly. The words surprised me. I turned slightly toward him. Why would you think that? You handled everything, he replied. The house, the kids, even your own feelings. You never asked for help. I took a slow breath. I didn't want to burden you, I said. He let out a soft, almost painful chuckle. You were never a burden. Those words, they settled deep. Because sometimes, in long marriages, we stop asking, not because we're strong, but because we're afraid. Afraid of being ignored, afraid of being too much, afraid of hearing nothing back. I needed you, I whispered. I still do. There was a pause, then his hand found mine under the blanket. I'm still here, he said, and something inside me finally softened. Not in a dramatic way, not like a movie, but in a quiet, steady way, like something broken had been gently set back into place. The days that followed were not perfect. Let me be honest about that. We still had habits, still had moments where silence tried to creep back in. He would go quiet sometimes. I would hesitate. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. But now, we noticed. That was the difference. One morning, I was standing at the kitchen sink, watching the sunlight hit the backyard. Robert came up behind me. Not close, just near. "Coffee?" he asked. I turned. "Yes," I said. He poured it, set it beside me. Then he stayed. That was new. He didn't walk away. He didn't sit down with the newspaper. He stayed. And we stood there, looking out the window together. No big conversation, no deep discussion, just shared presence. And sometimes that's what love becomes. Not grand gestures, not dramatic confessions, but quiet consistency. Choosing each other in small ways every day. A week later, our daughter Emily called. I answered like I always did, but this time, something in my voice must have sounded different. "Mom, you sound lighter," she said. I smiled without thinking. "I think I am," I replied. She paused. "That's good," she said softly. And it was. Not because everything was perfect, but because something had shifted inside me, inside us. That evening, Robert and I sat together again. No TV, no distractions, just talking. He told me stories from his days on the railroad, things I had never heard before. Not because he hadn't lived them, but because we had stopped sharing. I told him things too. Small things, feelings I used to keep quiet, moments I thought didn't matter, but they did. They always did. Because those small moments, they build connection, or they slowly take it away. Maybe you have felt this too. At this stage in life, we start to understand something important. Love doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades when it's not cared for. And loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from sitting beside someone and not feeling seen. I used to think turning 59 was the hardest part. The quiet house, the grown children, the slower days. But I was wrong. The hardest part was not age. It was silence. Unspoken words, missed chances, years of maybe later. But here's what I learned, and maybe this will mean something to you too. It's not too late. Not at 59, not at 65, not even at 75. As long as both people are still there is still something to reach for, something to rebuild, something to feel again. It doesn't come back all at once. It comes back in moments, in choices, in small steps toward each other. That night, before we turned off the lights, Robert looked at me and said, "I'm glad you said something that night." I smiled. So am I. Because sometimes, one honest sentence can change the direction of an entire life. And if you're sitting there right now, feeling that quiet distance, feeling unseen, feeling alone even when someone is beside you, maybe, just maybe, all it takes is one moment of truth, one step forward, one, "I feel this way." Not perfect, not easy, but real. Because in the end, love doesn't need perfection. It just needs presence and the courage to choose each other again.